guess to start, one of the things I wanted to ask was the very first speaker, Aaron Besky, was talking about. It almost sounded like he was going so far to say that the gallery is what makes the art, or the museum makes the art the art. And a lot of your work, you're sort of in confrontation with that idea, it seems.
He takes a very Duchampian position on what constitutes what an artwork, actually how an artwork is made. It
Right.
just, distinguishes itself from ordinary things. I don't necessarily prescribe to that. I believe that the primary sort of object of what artists do is show shit. They don't make things so then in the way that he's thinking about it. I mean, your primary contract with an artist is to show them something. Whether it be a kind of a notion or it be an object that you're making or something like that. But so the problem for me has never been one of like, how do you sustain the artfulness in something that doesn't look like art? But rather, how is that information? And what type of information can you deploy? What are the kind of problems that you can kind of invent and navigate and almost use it as a way to look at things, as a kind of a lens. But use that sort of dynamic. So in that sense, I would define things that way.
Is there sort of a perfect way to experience art, or what kind of requirements would the space in which an art? Because you like to call attention to the fact that it's necessarily there. So, is there an ideal, or is there something that people need to keep in mind? I guess
it's dangerous to think about idealism when you're talking about art. I think what's interesting about the culture of the last 40 years in the arts, and particularly in fine art sculpture, is that I think we've kind of learned to kind of produce and look at these very unstable structures, and somehow if you can sort of make those conditions sort of productive, then it becomes interesting. But it's not a question of of thinking about idealism. It's really more a question of can you kind of make a mechanism as an artist that can deal with as many contingencies as possible, and somehow thread it into kind of an interesting experience.
Yeah, so you're sort of talking. It seems like you're talking about taking away the mitigation and having your own way of shaping the actual experience of looking at art, putting that in the artist's hands.
Yeah,
rather than...
I'm invested in the notion of an active viewer.
Right. That you're a responsible viewer.
Somebody who may be responsible, maybe may not be, but the platform for the whatever this experience of the spectacle of what you're sort of your hope to do as an artist makes it work is that you will sort of be able to use your own recourses to unravel or to kind of decode or to experience it, And I think one of the problems I've always had with art and the way it was presented to me and the way I was sort of educated is that I've always thought that it was very, very passive. Is that it was really more like it was just strictly decoding. You had to sort of there was a kind of inherent stability in the code that didn't really account for a lot of other types of experiences, and so I had to sort of devise a way for me to work and think about things that could sort of put these two things next to each other, and then at least look at them, and look at the issues that I thought were just as visually impacting as the ones that are traditionally supposed to be visually impacting. So,
thinking about the house that you showed, and also the title piece in the Berlin Gallery, there isn't a decoding there, and you're definitely speaking about how language affects arts, but there is some knowledge outside of the artwork that seems, I don't know if you would say necessary, but it almost seems necessary to be able to approach it. You need to know that's the title to a certain extent, maybe, or that some things about the house.
I mean, I think you need to, but there's different languages that are there and different cultures that run through that work, and for me that's why it's interesting. In the sense, you have different professions, different vernacular fields, different cliches about what an art is supposed to be, what an artwork is supposed to be, what an architect does, what the museum is supposed to, how it's supposed to support and frame, and all. So it's a lot of stuff that gets kind of presented through that work. Not all of it everyone is going to have access to, and I don't expect them to. But there's also it's grounded in a very sort of established aspiration that people have, whether they're looking at art or not. I mean, most people, they look at their surroundings, and when there's something that stands out, it automatically becomes reflexive for them. In other words, they start to think about why. It's really more the ideas that I sort of use. I mean, I'm still really invested in this idea of defamiliarization, and it's an old Russian. It's Victor Shklovsky, who wrote in the beginning of the century. And he mostly was writing about film. He basically says, how do you make things? One of the really contemporary things about films is that it makes things strange, and the estrangement happens for a lot of different reasons. I mean, one of the examples I remember that was really interesting is that who's the Russian guy who made the films, and it was from the point of view of a horse, and that it was to me that was interesting because it was dynamic. It was working on both sides of the perceptual field. It wasn't just about what. I mean, that's what's nice about film is that it can extend, your intentions in a lot of different ways. Whether it is through the way you design things, to the guy making the camera, it's a sort of really interesting machine for just really destroying a very traditional mode of authorship.
Right. That seems very much what you're doing in so much of this is disassociating titles from their usual thing, like upending notions of authority or credentials and sort of turning things on their heads, make it, you're making something out of what you would like and shaping an experience based on what you would like rather than.
Yeah, I mean, I think art is. I mean, artists are basically people who are given this very special place, and they have this privilege, and it's a shame to have to be able to really maximize or optimize that privilege. And in order to do that, things have to get complicated because as people become more and more literate in vernacular, modes of reflexivity, like people shop and they buy like a T-shirt that has a transgressive message in it, and they're really talking about something their parents didn't like for them to do or something like that, and it's intuitive. It's not, so like the reflexive is already kind of embedded in everybody's daily life. So if you're going to talk about that, you have to make a kind of a superstructure that's more complex than that. And I think that's really hard. That's what an artist should do. Right. I mean, from my point of view.
You were talking about film as being this collaborative art and getting to it, and it's a more complicated way in terms of process. And I guess for your house, you had to collaborate with a lot of people. Was the process of building the house something that interested you, as in terms of having to work with? I imagine maybe other architects or contractors.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was a really transitional, formative piece in the sense that I really had to understand and devise a way to work that I really wasn't trained to do. I think are you guys artists or? I mean, you're taught to basically. I mean, in art school, you're kind of given a room and you kind of everything is supposed to come from you. And it's not. You're not really. It's really your conception of yourself as an artist is very much tied to those kinds of orders.
Yeah,
those identities. They symbolize themselves. Right. But I had sort of come up with a project where that really didn't help me very much to realize it. So I had to kind of really kind of understand and rethink the kind of my notion of what type of an author I was, and I was going to be with this project. And the more that it unfolded, the more interesting it became for me because the more space it made for me to be a viewer of my own work. It was sort of like it was kind of funny because with the one hand I was sort of deeply embedded in this work, but at the same time I was working with other people, and I could sort of kind of be in and out in this kind of complex way, in a really interesting way. So, and that's what I mean. It really kind of changed the way I thought about, my idea of what an artist was supposed to do and how they were supposed to work, and how I was supposed to look at what I was doing, how do I judge it, how do I, and I had to sort of kind of invent and come up with a different set of criteria for what an interesting artwork is for me or not. So.